We had hoped to work in partnership with the government to target that affordability to people who need it the most. But unfortunately, a blanket freeze doesn't do that, and again, just passes the responsibility to the municipality.
So year over year, in 2024, we saw over 5,000. That's 2,000 more than we saw in 2023, and 4,000 more than we saw in 2022.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the week's top stories from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
We're going to start in Eastern Charlotte, but first, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I had a wonderful week off. I was in London and Paris, but what I appreciated most was you and the team here holding down fort at CHCO and The Courier, so I could get that true week away. So I feel like I'm catching up, but I appreciate you being right here beside me to walk me through it.
Yeah, I mean, we want to touch on a topic that we did talk about in the last episode of This Week Uncut, because we've been able to fully dive into the data. And for those who are hearing this for the first time, Eastern Charlotte Fire Department is experiencing an increase in medical calls month over month from last year. So in the month of March, they saw 39 medical calls as opposed to 7 in March of 2024. So that's kind of what we were dealing with in terms of the story.
Wow, and so this is something that while we're studying this in Eastern Charlotte, it could be something that across the board in municipalities around New Brunswick, it could be a common thread.
Yeah, exactly. The Union of Municipalities, the Paramedics Association of New Brunswick, the Association of Fire Chiefs have encouraged the government to kind of take a look at Ambulance New Brunswick's model to help municipalities that are seeing those spike in medical calls. And actually, I'll look at the data, because we did get some data from Ambulance New Brunswick as well that sheds some light on the number of or the amount of times, I should say, that they're responding to their rural response time, which is 22 minutes. And the first graph that we're going to bring up shows you all of Charlotte County, apart from St. George, the times and the months and the percentages that they responded to medical calls in that 22-minute time frame.
Okay, when you're looking at this data, what picture does it paint for you? What are the concerns?
So it shows you that there is a small gap, right? In March, there was about a 20% gap. And so that shows you that there could be 20% of those calls where the ambulance is just not getting there in 22 minutes. And if you're in an emergency, 22 minutes is a long time. And you'll recall, and even in the article that we wrote, Jason Gadet, the Chief Administrative Officer, says sometimes people are just relieved that someone's coming, right?
Okay, and the concern from the municipality's point of view is that if this is a trend that continues, it could be increased year over year, and also what that means in terms of the residents' concerns when you are having that medical call. If you do have to wait for the ambulance longer than anticipated from year to year, if this is a trend that continues, could have a great impact on the people that live there.
The question that was raised by the councillors, which we saw last week, was, how long is this fiscally feasible? They have to pay their firefighters per call. I think it's something like $26 a call. And it will come to a toll. It will come to a head, right? And the concern for the municipality is not necessarily the fiscal ramifications, but the human resource ramifications. So the people who are actually responding to these calls are going to get tired, they're going to get taxed, their mental health is going to take a toll, which was also pointed out by another councillor. But we'll also show you some data where we have another graph that we're going to pull up that shows the amount of ambulance or 911 calls, that result in offload delay. So for people who don't know what an offload delay is, it's the amount of time an ambulance spends with a patient waiting to have that patient released into hospital care. Again, a similar trend showing most of Charlotte County, apart from St. George, that there was a gap in the amount of time, apart from Grand Manan, where calls were they were in offload delay for an extended period of time.
And obviously the concern is residents not being able to have Ambulance New Brunswick on scene on time, but also when we spoke to Jason Gadet, again, Chief Administrative Officer for Eastern Charlotte, a while back, he did mention that sometimes what the concern is that the training might not be there on the part of the mostly volunteer fire department. And also there could be PTSD issues that arise, not just with the people that are making these calls, calls, but the fire department responding to them when you don't know exactly what to do in a situation and you're on site trying to be that helping hand, trying to be the relief for the person in distress, that can have an impact on the people trying to provide the service, but not necessarily being adequately prepared to respond to every medical call.
Yeah, and paramedics are specially trained to handle emergency in the field situations. And so when the fire department responds, it's obviously not quite the same level of care, but the municipality may want to invest in training. That's up to them to decide. But we're going to have Mayor John Craig in later this week, and we're going to have some further questions about the classification of calls and that sort of thing to kind of figure out if we can suss out how these calls are being administered and dispatched and that sort of thing.
And Ray, it's obviously why data is so important from not just a municipality's point of view, but from a journalist's point of view. When you're able to take those numbers and look at them and see a concern, it paints a picture of maybe a larger problem, not just in the case of Eastern Charlotte, but as we mentioned, if this is happening in Charlotte County, perhaps this is something that might be a greater trend across the province. As you delve into this issue closer and more long-term, what else will you be looking at to figure out what the issues are?
So we're going to try to understand why this year Eastern Charlotte is seeing such a spike, but we're also going to compare it to other fire departments of similar size and capacity and geography, right? It's very important to have perspective when you're looking at stories like these. Nothing occurs in a vacuum, right? And we have heard that this is something that other municipalities are dealing with. So it will be taking a full picture of what that whole scenario looks like, and we have part of the picture, so we're going to go after the rest of the picture.
Okay, we are going to take a quick break, and we will be right back with more of This Week Uncut.
There's going to be, municipalities are going to deal with it in different ways, but certainly it's going to be trying, and it's, I don't think, really going to have the effect that the province wants it to have.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. Now again, Nathalie, it was away last week, so I'm letting you take the lead on everything. Please tell me what is the next big discussion for This Week Uncut.
So a lot of journalists and municipalities have been waiting for the news that dropped this past week, but before that, the government announced a property assessment freeze. So what that means is property assessments will not increase. They'll remain the same as what you saw in 2025. That's not good news for everybody, though.
I was going to say, that sounds like it's great relief for the taxpayer, but that might have a different impact on the municipalities, and I'm sure there are concerns when it comes to council.
Yeah, for sure. Property assessment is the main source of funding for municipalities. So when you hear that the town is setting a tax rate, it's setting your property assessment rate. And what that does is that money is then paid to the province through you, the residential and commercial ratepayer. And that money is then redistributed to municipalities. The other thing to know here is that municipalities cannot run deficits, which means they do run deficits in the sense that they take on debt, so for certain things, but that's sort of the only kind of deficit they run. They have to clear the books at the end. It has to be leveled at zero. So for example, for the town of St. Andrews, that's $6.4 million. So at the end of the day, this was not good news for municipalities, and we were able to talk with the Union of Municipalities, and they sent out a press release that was very striking. And they said that this property assessment freeze is expected to cost municipalities $58 million. And if you were paying attention to the news about the funding that municipalities are going to get, it kind of a little bit negates that $68 extra million that they're going to get out of this extra funding.
Wow. So when you spoke to the Union of Municipalities, what were the key takeaways from the conversation?
Well, the quote that stuck in my brain was that this is paternalism, not partnership. So they sort of seem to think that the government is just acting on their behalf and not really consulting in them in the way that was promised. Now, successive governments, the Higgs government and now the Holt government, are kind of bulldozing their way through this fiscal reform. And so they're very upset about that process. And all these downloaded responsibilities are costing municipalities extra money. All these new areas are all costing the municipalities extra money, but they're not really getting any extra funding. And so it came as a shock to them, I think, that they would decide to do this without consultation, and that's exactly what we heard from the Union of Municipalities.
Especially after we saw amalgamation happen, it took a while for fiscal reform to catch up, and now you throw in this factor as well. Anything that you've heard from council or mayors specifically?
Yeah, we talked to the mayor of St. Andrews about this during a recent episode of Your Town Matters. Again, it just sort of seems like there was no consultation, and municipalities are worried about infrastructure and about the deficits that they carry in that infrastructure. You know, this county alone has had trouble with drinking water. You know, St. Stephen's struggled with a boil water advisory, and council has admitted that, you know, the infrastructure is aging. Their lift station needs to be replaced. You know, the deputy CAO described holding it together with kind of glue and tape, right? These are all things that are going to affect the everyday lives of New Brunswickers. And the minister said during an embargoed press conference with us was that municipalities are going to have to make difficult decisions. But Dan Murphy, the executive director of the Union of Municipalities, said they're already doing that. They're not going to start making difficult decisions. They're already doing that. But what he essentially meant is that they're going to have to raise their tax rate.
Right, and when we look at things like inflation, obviously that creates an even more complicated picture when the expenses of the town are going up and these rates are set in stone for another year.
Well, and there is evidence. So during the Gallant government, 41 communities during a property assessment freeze had to raise their property assessment rate. If nothing changes, but the services continue to need to be available, the tax rate's going to go up. The other thing that they announced the following day on Wednesday, which is what we've all been waiting for a very long time, is several new sources of funding. But the devil is going to be in the details, because we actually didn't get a lot of information. And actually during the press conference, journalists were actually unable to finish asking their questions. The minister had to go to the Legislative Assembly. So there was a lineup of journalists that didn't get to ask any questions. So what he did announce was the Fiscal Capacity Fund, and I'm going to read from the paper because I don't want to get it wrong, $75 million. This fund will replace the existing community funding grant. So you would have heard about that a lot. The community funding grant is equalization payments that are given to municipalities to make them even and to support their services. Those have been clawed back year over year over year. So you would have heard about that. The Regional Services Support Fund is $18 million. This fund will help regional service commissions implement their regional strategies that can be used to supplement up to 50% of the total funding for eligible incentives. So you would have heard about this as well, is that, you know, municipalities were kind of complaining about having to pay the Regional Service Commission as well because they help with some services. And the Capital Renewal Fund, $45 million. This is a new fund that will support the improvement and replacement of existing municipal infrastructure. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that we'll have a lot to talk to Mayor Craig about on Wednesday, aside from just the rise in medical calls. I think that, you know, when you are that taxpayer, sometimes you hear these announcements and it sounds like great news. But when you look at the full picture, especially in small communities, when so much of what we do is community-based, and sometimes those services can be stretched thin. So I wonder what the struggles will be in terms of how we go forward with some of the services we're already trying to provide, even to greater areas which have been complicated by amalgamation, especially if you look at Eastern Charlotte, which grew geographically by quite a large size. So they're already, I think, dealing with those growing pains of addressing a geographically large municipality that I don't think that grew in a size that other municipalities haven't had to struggle with when it comes to providing services. And honestly, that actually points to the medical calls. When we look at the area that Eastern Charlotte Fire Department now has to cover, it's Bonnie River, it's Penfield, it's St. George, it's Blacks Harbor. Is quite large. So I think it's complicated, and definitely if you look at it from municipality to municipality, things can be very different based on how much that grew in size as well.
And there were journalists did ask several questions of the minister, including how that equalization formula would be presented, if it would be transparent. It's kind of a joke among municipal administrators that it's not really known how the equalization grant is actually decided or formulated. So that was a question. One of the questions that came out of the property assessment freeze is that it doesn't apply to new construction or renovation. And the minister suggested that, some municipalities will be able to get revenue because they'll have development, but that doesn't work for smaller municipalities. Eastern Charlotte comes to mind. St. Andrews has done about 3%, which is good for a municipality of this, excellent for a municipality of this size, I should say. But it's not going to work for every municipality, right? And so we continue to sort of ask questions, but we're going to keep going with those. We did ask for another opportunity to speak with him about some of the questions that we have, but we haven't heard back, so we're still waiting on that.
When you look back at the questions that you weren't able to ask, that other journalists weren't able to hit on in that conference due to the minister's limited time availability, what are some of the key questions that still need to be addressed?
Well, we need to understand how this money is going to be divvied up, right? What municipality gets what amount? How are you classifying that money? Do small municipalities get different types of funding? There was just so many things up in the air. But the other question, the minister made a statement about during his time as CAO of Quispamsis about canceling, paving projects. And the question actually is it fair to taxpayers to have to do those things simply because there's no funding model to support proper investment in infrastructure? That's the biggest question on my mind, right? To simply say difficult decisions have to be made is not fair to the taxpayers who are continuing to face an affordability crisis.
And I know that you had Mayor Henderson of St. Andrews in last week, but he's stepping down in June, so this will be something for Acting Mayor Akaji and Council to address going forward. Was that something he was able to touch on in your interview, or something that you will address with Acting Mayor Akaji?
Well, I will address it with Acting Mayor Akaji definitely when she comes to sit down with us. But it's funny that you said that, because I said to Brad, I said, does it actually make you want to stay longer to kind of continue to fight this fight on the part of municipalities? Because he's been a big advocate, and he's also been very honest and open about how difficult this process has been, fiscal reform and municipal reform. He said yes, it does, but he has made a commitment to his family. But it'll be interesting to see how municipalities navigate what I would describe as some very muddy water.
Our understanding is that there are 3 funding streams that are part of the announcement related to fiscal reform. So there's the first, which is the equalization fund, or the fiscal capacity piece, so to ensure that municipalities can offer similar services at a similar tax rate. So that's one part. We understand that to be about 75.7 million, I think is the number. The second fund is an infrastructure capital renewal fund that we estimate, I think, is year one is $45 million and growing to $95 million by 2030. At which point it's going to be indexed. So that's the second fund. And then the third fund is the RSS, I don't know, it's Regional Support Fund. So it's to help offset costs related to the regional service commissions for regional mandates. So those are the 3 things that we've learned about yesterday. Of course, from our end, all of that is good news, or would have been good news, I guess, except for the announcement of the freeze on Tuesday.
Yes. So I wanted to get to that in my questions to the minister, but it sort of feels like the property freeze negates a lot of what you're going to get next year. I think it's 58 million was the number used in the press release. So are they excuse the is it robbing Peter to pay Paul? It sort of seems like they're cutting off an arm to add a leg, I guess.
Yeah, I think for us, the questions that we're asking ourselves, because both Minister Kennedy and Minister Legacy have both said that municipalities may have to raise rates because of this move. So the question, I guess, becomes, this isn't an affordability measure, then it's just a way to pass the buck and put pressure on municipalities. And that's unfortunate and is disheartening. And it's not in the spirit of collaboration that the government put forward.
Well, and one of the questions that was asked, about that property assessment freeze is that municipalities could benefit from new construction and renovation. But when you're talking about smaller municipalities, and I have several of them here in Charlotte County, development is not really, a thriving business. Eastern Charlotte is really struggling to find developers. St. Stephen is struggling. Um, they're not going to be able to benefit from that. So I guess could you kind of explain that for folks who might not understand why that is not actually an advantage for small municipalities?
Sure. I mean, any new construction that's going to happen in a municipality will help some, but I was on the phone with a community in the southeast today, which is the fastest growing part of the province. And they're in the heart of it, and their rate last year was 2.5% in terms of new growth of their total, assessment base. So like that's not enough to offset what's here. And for most rural communities, it would be much less than that. So will it help? Yes. But I think what municipalities are really struggling to understand is how we're supposed to deal with the cost pressures of running local governments when we don't have a lot of control over our costs. A lot of our costs are fixed outside of our control. And it's going to mean that we're just going to have to pass that on to our citizens or cut services, and that's not a real affordability measure. We had hoped to work in partnership with the government to target that affordability to people who need it the most. But unfortunately, a blanket freeze doesn't do that, and again, just passes the responsibility to the municipality.
Um, it's my understanding in talking to some chief administrative officers that there's no regulation. There was no regulations tabled yesterday. It was simply the allocation of money, which in my mind doesn't actually require legislation. You can just reallocate money to um, municipalities. So, do you have an understanding of where this money is coming from? Do they intend to take you off of a reliance on property tax? Like, did you get any further kind of idea of how they're going to do this?
I think the money is just coming from general revenues. The reports that we did in partnership with our sister organization last year estimates, that the need was of about $200 million, $220 million a year. So the amount announced, while not what we wanted, was a step in the right direction until you count in the assessment freeze. But in terms of the final details of, how it's going to be allocated, who gets what, how that all works, that's still in the process of being figured out in regulation. So I anticipate that we'll have that in the next few months. The goal all along, I think, is to make sure that municipalities have the new numbers in hand to help with the budgeting cycle come the fall. But again, that's going to put a lot of pressure on municipalities given the other news that they coupled it with. So, it is disappointing and it is very frustrating. I would say that our members, there wasn't a consultation process on this. And it's really just it's a move that puts pressure on our folks who have the least amount of ability and the least amount of new revenue sources to offset that kind of work.
Well, and yesterday the minister said when I was CAO of Quispam-Sis, we had to cancel our paving projects for the year, but he said those were the decisions that had to be made, and he sort of justified that decision. But do you think that it's fair to ratepayers to say, "Oh, listen, the street that that you're driving on every day can't get paved because the provincial government won't let us or hasn't allowed us the ability to do what needs to be done to make your life better?"
Like councils are always in the best position to make local decisions on local priorities. That's what we do. The challenge, of course, in that example is it doesn't make the problem go away. If you defer infrastructure this year to next year, it's likely just going to end up being more expensive and cost you more down the line and cost the ratepayers more. So part of what we wanted to do with fiscal reform was make sure that we had enough infrastructure available to renew those assets on a timely basis that our citizens deserve. So of course, municipalities next year may choose to reduce their infrastructure budgets. They may choose to get out of supporting provincial initiatives. Increasingly, the municipalities have been supporting provincial services that the province hasn't been doing a very good job of allocating. So whether that's homelessness or addictions or housing or fire response to ambulance calls, like these are also elements where municipalities may say, this isn't our core mandate. We don't have the revenue to do that this year. So maybe we're going to look to change how we do this. But any decision like that is going to have impacts. But it's the province, I don't think, fully understands the decision it made and the impacts it's going to have on their what their goals are as well. We share the same goals. We want affordability for our citizens. We want doctors in our communities. We want good recreation opportunities. We want all of these things. And municipalities are the best positioned partner to do that work. But in this case, if you tie our hands behind our back, we can't do the work.
So you mentioned early on that it is possible that, and the minister suggested this as well, that municipalities could, need to raise their rates in order. So I guess, after 2026, unless they perpetually intend to freeze property assessments or find you another funding stream, ratepayers are going to get a bit of a punch in the face in 2027. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, it's hard to say what's going to happen between now and then, but I think in general, whenever you freeze something, you have to come back and find out how you address the freeze. So if folks are cutting services next year, then yeah, there's going to be a catch-up period. If folks decide to hold the line on property taxes, there's going to be a catch-up period. At some point, it's going to come back. So again, like this is presented as an affordability measure, but it's again, affordable for who? And, if municipalities have to raise their rates, and I think there was a story on the CBC about in 2018, that meant 41 communities had to put up their tax rate in the Glant government. If, that's the case now, and then you're further compounding all of the new responsibilities through local governance reform, and then the other things that municipalities have stepped into, like, there's a risk that it could be almost every municipality. Like there's going to be, municipalities are going to deal with it in different ways, but certainly it's going to be trying, and it's, I don't think, really going to have the effect that the province wants it to have.
That was Dan Murphy, the Executive Director of the Union of Municipalities. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with This Week Uncut.
We're a small but mighty team, so we really put our heart and soul into everything that we're doing. We're going to increase the evening and weekend programming. We totally understand that not everyone can get to daytime programming, and we really want to overcome that. I know that it's a gap that we have currently.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
Nathalie, we are heading back to Eastern Charlotte, this time to the YMCA, where there was a presentation by Paige Scott about the success, really, that they've had in having the YMCA present in Eastern Charlotte.
All roads lead back to Eastern Charlotte. It was a tremendous presentation. This community has been really active in working towards getting childcare spaces, childcare programming, and she gave a great presentation to council during the April meeting to talk about the usership. You were there.
I was there, and I it was neat to see Councillor Alexa Dedorakis, who has a baby. I think he's around 1 year old now, so she was able to speak from firsthand experience of just how wonderful the programs are for new mothers, for people with young children, but also to people of all ages. And that was something that Paige Scott also addressed in her presentation, was just that this is really about bringing that intergenerational aspect of rural community living together. There's programs for all ages, but they really want to encourage a lot of people, whether it's a game night, to come out, whether you're youth or a senior, to really get the community bonding together. And we're seeing that really be the success of what it is. They started off when they first launched of being, just hundreds through the door, and now it's in the thousands and increasing year over year.
In fact, in 2024, they had 5,000 users, which was way more than they had. Like you said, they only had a couple hundred, but they started mid-year year, and now they're expecting in 2025 over 7,000 users.
Wow, and I think that really does speak to things like small communities. When we do have those connections, those spaces where we bond together, that can often lead to a healthier, happier community, and I think it really is quite special.
I would love to go to Coffee and Cards, actually. She mentioned that program quite a bit, so maybe we'll take advantage of that. But it's also important to note that she wants to, they have a small team there. They work very hard in Eastern Charlotte, but they said they're trying to expand programming to evenings and weekends because not everybody can get there during the day. And I thought that was very important, right? Not everybody has a set schedule or is available during the day. So they're working really hard over there to kind of expand the programming.
And she has said that you and I can come, not just for Coffee and Cards, but for a tour of all the programs. I think it would be a great way for us to experience all that they have to offer.
Absolutely, we would love to. Here is Paige Scott's presentation to Eastern Charlotte Council and their comments.
We have Paige Scott with us tonight. Paige, you have the floor. Thank you for being here tonight.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me time this evening to speak to the YMCA updates in our community. All right. So my name is Paige Scott. I'm the manager of community and program development in Eastern Charlotte, and I'm with the YMCA. So I oversee all of the recreation programming and the YMCA after-school program at St. George Elementary School. So the community programs, I just want to give a little bit of an overview, like an update of the progress that we've made so far, because it's coming up on 3 years that we've been in the community. So we've seen really good growth. So I just want to give a little bit of insight to how that's been going. So we are primarily out of the gym and the upstairs of the Eastern Charlotte Recreational Complex. So we're very fortunate to utilize that area, and we're very thankful to the municipality to give us the opportunity to create impact in our community and utilize that space. So we've had a lot of transformation. On our Facebook page, it's YMCA in Eastern Charlotte County. We've posted some photos as of lately to see the transformation. You can see that it's come to life in there. You're seeing a lot of there's art on the walls from the kids. There's a lot of affirmations around, so it's really coming to life. It's brighter. It's happy to see. So we've had great participation in 2025 so far. Having just finished the first quarter, we saw 1,838 participants in the first 3 months of 2025. In January, we had 568, February 515, and in March 755. So we had a really good March because we had a great March break. So throughout March break, we had programming throughout 5 days, and we had 229 participants, and it was awesome. So we saw people of all ages. We had Coffee and Cards with seniors, we had kinder play, open gym. We had people of every age group coming. It was amazing, and that's what we want to see. So it was busy, but it was a great time, and that's what the momentum we want to keep up. So I also want to talk to the opportunities that we're creating in the community. So by having the YMCA community programming and by having us in the Eastern Charlotte Rec Complex, we have had 5 NBCC students complete their practicum with us. So we just had 2 students complete their last day last Friday, and we have them both interviewing for summer positions, so we're hopeful. Last year, one of our practicum students filled a summer position at the Y. She just finished up her ECE course. She starts on Monday, so she'll be working with our after-school program and through the summer day camps. So we're seeing community impact because they're all Charlotte County residents, and so that's 5, and then we've had at least 2 job opportunities from that so far. It's been great, and we're happy to keep them home and keep them employed here with us and creating impact. So I had a list of programming that we offer, but I'm not pointing to anything. So we have rotational programming that goes through. We post our schedules on Facebook weekly, and We are trying to keep a very consistent schedule and timeline, but wanting to add more open gyms and more Y hangouts. So we want to make sure that everyone knows that those are open for people of all ages. So you don't have to just be a teenager to be in the gym shooting basketball. You could be any age. We have a cute kinder gym area. You could be playing badminton, and it doesn't matter if you're good or not. We have the walking track. We've got lots of seniors coming out so that there is no traffic, so that they didn't have to walk on sidewalks or on the side of the road. You can use it, regardless of weather. So we're having a great time with that. So family game nights, open gyms, trivia, crafts, seasonally usually. But then we also have Kinder Play. That's our most attended program. So that would be for children and guardians 0 to 5. So I would also like to speak to our growth year over year, now that we're into our 3rd year. So each quarter since we've started, we've shown growth. And throughout 2024, we had a total of 5,609 participants in Eastern Charlotte, in addition to having our licensed after-school program at St. George Elementary School and offering 10 weeks of summer day camp. And we were maxed out at 17 kids each week. We also had 2 weeks of unlicensed day camps in Blacks Harbor, and so we're hoping to do that again. So year over year, in 2024, we saw over 5,000. That's 2,000 more than we saw in 2023, and 4,000 more than we saw in 2022. Right now, we're on track to see over 7,000 in 2025, with 1,838 people so far this year. So how we're going to build on that is we're going to keep the momentum going, offer more programming. We're a small but mighty team, so we really put our heart and soul into everything that we're doing. We're going to increase the evening and weekend programming. We totally understand that not everyone can get to daytime programming, and we really want to overcome that. I know that it's a gap that we have currently, and we're working on that. We haven't previously advertised birthday parties, but I guess it's out there now. So we do offer birthday parties. We've been doing them on a trial basis, but they've been going over really well. So we offer those specifically on the weekends, and we want to build on that. It'll be summer before you know it here soon. We're hoping to at least offer 3 weeks of unlicensed day camp in Blacks Harbor, and that'll be in addition to the 10 weeks that go on at St. George Elementary School. Those are open for 15 kids per week, and we would have up to 20 for our unlicensed program in Blacks Harbor. Overall, I want to reiterate that our goal is to have quality programming that's accessible, safe, and enjoyable. I want to, I say that, we do. I really want to, because I feel so passionate about it, meet the needs of our community. And I want to reiterate that it's not just for children. So we love to see new faces come to Cards and Coffee. Sometimes we have homeschool children and their parents come to Cards and Coffee as an opportunity to get out. You do not need to have your children play Cards and Coffee. There's tons of space that they can run. You can have coffee in the other end of the room. Do whatever you want. If you're there, your children can go downstairs and run around with you while we drink coffee upstairs. But we just really want to be inclusive to all ages and make sure it's accessible to everybody. If you have suggestions, questions, or if you'd like to volunteer, because we always love to have volunteers join our group, please email me. And to make sure that you stay on top of what we're doing, follow our Facebook page. So our Facebook page is YMCA in Eastern Charlotte County. And my email is p.scott@yswnb.ca. That's everything. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paige. What I'm going to do at this point, just before you leave, I'm just going to turn it over to council at this point and give them an opportunity to either ask a question or make a statement. And so
Absolutely.
I'll go to Councilor Dedrick, I'm sure you usually, I know that you use this service quite a bit, so maybe you want to.
I love the YMCA.
There you go.
And I see Paige, I would say at least once a week.
Yep.
My son, I take him to Kinder Play, and it's been the best thing for him. It's the best thing I could possibly imagine. He's there playing with other kids, older kids at that, and we're playing with different toys. The staff is super attentive. It's a safe space. I couldn't sing the YMCA's praises enough. In terms for adult recreation, I'm part of this mom group chat, and it was dropped in our chat that apparently there's pickleball tonight.
There's
actually.
pickleball tonight, yes.
So next Wednesday, that's something that I will be taking part in.
Awesome.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Councillor Hatt.
So I think when did we start this? 2021?
Yeah.
I think that's when we kicked it off, way
Yep.
back, and when it
Yep.
was just Council of Blacks.
Yep.
I mean, if you remember the numbers then, we were at 300 coming out of the gate.
Yep.
This year projected to be at 7,000. Remember what I told you?
Yeah.
We're going to make this place a beehive.
Yep.
Let's make it like a beehive.
Yep.
Have it active, have people coming in and out. The only question that we have come back on, like far as recreation, and I know we've communicated that, is something a little bit for the, I don't want to say older youth, but
Yeah.
that mid-age youth,
Yep.
like the Y hangouts, that was a big thing. So definitely that will be awesome if that can come back and
Yeah,
start being
absolutely.
supported for it a little bit. But
Yep.
all in all, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council? No? Thank you very much, Paige, for coming in today. I appreciate it.
Thank
nice
you.
Nice to have you here tonight.
That was Paige Scott, the Community and Program Development Coordinator for Eastern Charlotte, speaking to council. But it isn't the only childcare news we got. This week I wrote a story on Friday, actually, about the new childcare facility, which has been 2 years in the making.
Wow, and I do remember being a part of council meetings in the past, covering council meetings where we heard from residents during the moments of public comment years back, talking about how they saw some people in the community, in particular, I think they were speaking of a doctor at one point. I remember Glenn Hawkins, a resident, talking to council and addressing the fact that he thought some people would have to leave the community because they didn't have some of these services available when you are working parents and you really need that child care.
Yeah, and it is absent largely. There's no large childcare facilities in Charlotte County. There are some small independent providers, but the YMCA is a great resource, and they're leaning on them to do this project. But we have some of the details now. It will be 82 spaces in total, 52 designated childcare spaces, 0 to 5, and then 30 after-school spaces for children 5 to 12. So that's a lot of spaces for Charlotte County.
Wow, that is incredible, and it will be really interesting to follow it going forward. I know we've heard this in other communities as well. We've heard it in St. Andrews Council when you look at people having to leave rural areas because childcare isn't available in the capacity they need it. Sometimes it might be available, but you work late. You might work in a hospital, for instance. So it'll be neat to see how this shapes the community, how it makes lives better, and it allows people to continue their work.
Childcare is one of the things municipalities are now dealing with that are another level of government's responsibility, right? But they're active and they're involved in the process. And council says the construction estimate should be available this summer. They'll have further discussions about funding with other partners, including the provincial and federal governments, which will be providing the capital funding for the project. And the municipality will provide financial assistance, but also the land, which will be near Macadavic Place in St. George. And they're going to go to official tendering, and then in November and December, construction is expected to begin in March.
Well, exciting times for Eastern Charlotte. We will be right back after this break.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. Well, Nathalie, I have to thank you so much for holding down for it. I had the most amazing vacation in London, in Paris. I feel like we're ships passing in the night right now. You're going to take a week off where we are filming This Week Uncut, and then you are about to leave for vacation.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere as fancy as London and Paris. I will be staying mostly in St. Andrews, but my father will be visiting, so I'm very excited to see him. But I have set up the Courier for the next week, so folks will see lots of stories continuing to be posted to the website. We're going to have a story on the world world's oldest basketball court in St. Stephen. We're going to have a story about some of that library worker funding that's been cut from the province with a little bit of a local angle that we've taken with it, and seed funding denials for municipalities in Eastern Charlotte.
Okay, and we are hearing a lot of people expressing concern that they didn't receive seed funding that they have had in years prior, so it'll be interesting to hear more from who specifically was denied seed funding this year, and perhaps delve deeper into the reasons why. I'm back from vacation. What I have coming up this week, I'm sure there will be more, but at this point in time, I will be sitting down with Stephanie, Sam, and Desiree from the Willow Center in St. Stephen. May 30th is Teal Day, and this is a day that recognizes survivors of sexual violence, and it's also a movement to just draw more awareness to sexual violence in general. And if you aren't familiar with the Willow Center in St. Stephen, it's fairly new to the community. They do incredible work, so we'll not just be discussing Teal Day, we'll be talking a lot about the Willow Center and also how they are networked into all the other services that already exist in Charlotte County.
I look forward to seeing that. I will be watching even though I'm on vacation.
Well, and we will have Paddle Fest coming up here in St. Andrews as well. So I also have Luke McDonald. He is the creative director of Paddle Fest, coming in with Darren Ryan, and I think I believe she goes by outdoor or recreation coordinator. I'll get her title down for sure. I'm sorry, Danny, about that. And Jamie Steele as well, the original founder of Paddle Fest, to tell us a little bit about the history of the festival in the community, how it got started, how it evolved into what it is today, and also getting into the details of the lineup for this year. It should be exciting. I know that you'll be off, but I hope to see you at Paddle Fest.
You'll see me around. I'll be in and about around St. Andrews.
I'm surprised you told Patrick that you're having a staycation. You don't want to get called into the office.
May happen, may not happen. We'll see what happens.
And we will see you as well next week on This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.